Today we are looking at a case from the second part of the 19th century, so sit back as we go to the USA. Ellen Lucas was born in 1856 in the growing industrial town of Bridgeport in Connecticut. The Lucas family belonged to the respectable middle class, a station neither wealthy or poor, but steady and well regarded. Bridgeport at the time was in the midst of transformation. The arrival of the railroads and the expansion of manufacturing had turned it into a bustling port city, attracting labourers, merchants, and skilled tradespeople. Like many families of their standing, the Lucases valued hard work, respectability, and propriety. As Ellen came of age, she began keeping company with a young man named James Latin. He worked as an assistant in a meat market and was by all outward appearances confident, well-spoken and attentive. At first, her parents believed him to be a decent match for their eldest daughter. He seemed to be ambitious and polite, and Ellen appeared genuinely fond of him. But troubling details soon began to surface. Mr. Henry Lucas, Ellen's father, learned that James Latin had already been married and divorced, an unsettling fact for someone still in his early 20s. The marriage had ended quickly, and circumstances regarding its demise were vague. Though Mr. Latin had not exactly hidden this part of his past, he hadn't volunteered it either. As Mr. Lucas began to look more thoroughly into James Latin, he heard rumours of his poor behaviour and generally unsavoury reputation. The more Mr. Lucas heard, the more he began to worry, and he wondered what else might be hidden beneath his daughter's fiancé's carefully crafted charm. When he spoke to Ellen about these concerns, she refused to believe them, and reluctantly, Mr. and Mrs. Lucas agreed that she could marry James Latin. The date for the wedding was then set for the 3rd of October 1874. Although Ellen seemed very taken with the young man, there were signs that everything was not as it should be. Mr. Latin, for reasons he never quite explained, had been reluctant to commit to a wedding date and did not seem to have much enthusiasm for the marriage. In fact, he even told Mr. Lucas that he would try and get the day off work, an odd remark for someone who was soon to be married. Still, the plans went ahead, and it was agreed that after the ceremony, the couple would travel to New Haven. On the evening of the 2nd of October, Ellen left the house, telling her parents that she would soon return. She had been feeling anxious and was allegedly going to see her fiancé. However, Ellen never came home. As hours passed and darkness fell, Mr. and Mrs. Lucas grew increasingly concerned. By the morning of the 3rd of October, the day that was meant to be their daughter Ellen's wedding day, they became frantic with worry. They went out to look for her, and friends and neighbours joined the search. Together they walked the streets of Bridgeport, calling Ellen's name, hoping for any sign of her, but she was nowhere to be found. As they were searching, workmen discovered a young woman lying face down in a shallow pool of water in the northern part of the city. The body was taken to the mortuary and later identified to be Miss Ellen Lucas. The discovery caused much anguish in the community, and it seemed that soon after, everyone was talking about the day that Ellen Lucas was supposed to be walking down the aisle. She was instead pulled dead from the water. At first glance, it seemed that she had drowned, and the immediate suspicion was that she had died by her own hand. But as investigators examined the scene more closely, this idea started to lose credibility. The brook where the body was found was no more than 3 inches deep, and for anyone to drown there, especially a young woman of fragile build, would have required an extraordinary effort, and this seemed unlikely given the circumstances. More compelling evidence lay along the bank of the stream. For many yards the grass and earth were crushed and trampled, as if someone had struggled fiercely. Officers now believed that Ellen had been murdered and had fought for her life with every ounce of strength that she had. The signs of a violent struggle made the theory that Ellen may have done this to herself appear impossible. A medical examination uncovered another striking fact. Ellen was several months pregnant. Whether her family knew of this was uncertain, but it seemed likely. In the weeks before her disappearance, her father, Mr. Henry Lucas, had been urging for the wedding date to be confirmed, and this urgency suggested he suspected something about Ellen's condition. Following this revelation, attention now turned to Ellen's fiancé, James Latin. He was interviewed by officers, but denied being near the brook on the night that Ellen vanished. However, witnesses soon contradicted this account. Several people reported seeing him on the evening of the 2nd of October, near the location where Ellen's body was later found. As the police continued to investigate, a witness came forward who said that on the night of Ellen Lucas's death, she had seen Ellen standing on the road with James Latin. The witness said that she had overheard Ellen say, "You'll be there, won't you?" To which Mr. Latin reluctantly replied that he would. The witness went on to say that Ellen then added something to the effect of, "If you're not there, you know what the consequences will be." Following this, Mr. James Latin was arrested by Officer Eastman, and when he was told that he'd be taken to the police station for questioning, he replied that he had been expecting a visit from the police. During the questioning, James Latin tried to provide an alibi. He said that he had been aboard a schooner that night that had been anchored in the river and which was captained by his cousin. However, when asked to confirm this, the cousin told officers that although James Latin had indeed come aboard, it was so late that he had already gone to bed and didn't see him. Officers then spoke to other crew members who said that Mr. Latin had not come aboard until very late that night, and this only made officers believe that Mr. Latin may have been responsible for the death of Miss Ellen Lucas and had only gone to the schooner to try and establish an alibi. A post-mortem examination was conducted and an inquest jury was assembled to try and find out how Miss Ellen Lucas had died. The post-mortem, however, was unable to establish an exact cause of death, and the body was released for burial. Shortly afterwards, however, new evidence came to light, as authorities discovered that Mr. Latin had purchased a large knife and a bottle of bromide from a local store. Officers were then sent to the meat shop where he worked, and found the items hidden in an old cloak. This was followed by a search of the place where he lived, and officers found poisons hidden in an old shoe. Further investigations uncovered that Mr. Latin had purchased these poisons from a Bridgeport pharmacy on the 29th of September, just days before Ellen's death. This then led to the suspicion that she may have been poisoned. Her body was exhumed, and a more thorough chemical analysis of her stomach and brain were carried out, while the inquest continued. Although there was no definitive evidence to prove exactly how Ellen had died, the growing weight of circumstantial evidence, Mr. Latin's suspicious purchases, and the witnesses who testified that they had seen him near the place where Ellen Lucas's body was found, meant that public opinion started to turn against him. Many believed he was guilty of both betrayal and murder. The inquest jury concluded that Ellen Lucas had died as a result of violence at the hands of James Latin, and he would now stand trial for murder. The trial of James Latin began on Wednesday the 24th of February 1875, in front of judges Sanford and Bawdsley. The courtroom was crowded, and a large number of witnesses had been summoned for both the prosecution and the defence. A jury had already been selected and was seated as the trial was about to commence. But in a strange twist, Mr. M.W. Seymour, the counsel for the defence, stood and informed the court that his client had decided that he would prefer to have his guilt or innocence determined by the judges rather than by a jury of 12 men. The decision came as a surprise to State Attorney James Olmsted, who objected to changing the course of the trial so late in the progress, especially after a jury trial had been agreed upon during the assignment day. Nevertheless, both sides eventually agreed to proceed under the new arrangement. The case had already attracted considerable public attention, so to maintain order, the two judges made the decision to only allow as many spectators as could be seated in the courtroom. They also stationed police officers at the entrance of the courthouse and in the building's corridors in order to prevent overcrowding and to ensure that the public areas remained clear. The excitement among the public was intense, and the press followed the proceedings closely, reporting each day's developments in detail. The first person to testify was Clarissa Lucas, the sister of the deceased. As she spoke, heavy snow fell outside the building, but this did not seem to deter the large crowd that had gathered, eager to hear news of the trial. Clarissa described a time when she had accompanied her sister and James Latin to the place known as Hemlock Grove, where the murder allegedly occurred. She described Mr. Latin's mood that day as downcast and said that he was less talkative than usual. She told the court that this happened just a few days before her sister's death. Bridgeport's chief of police, Mr. Marsh, was next to testify. He spoke about a paper collar that had been worn by Mr. Latin on the night of Ellen Lucas's death, and told of how an identical one was later found near the crime scene. Although the defendant was not the only person to use such a collar, the coincidence, according to Police Chief Marsh, was very telling. A young man who lived in the same house as James Latin and slept in the room next to him said that on the 2nd of October 1874, James had returned very late and looked very pleased with himself. He said that when he asked him why he was so happy, James replied that he had had a very good evening. Another witness named Frederick Beach testified that he had spoken to Mr. Latin after Ellen Lucas was found dead. He said that he asked him if he had heard what had happened, and looking at the judges, said that Mr. Latin expressed no surprise on hearing of her death. Mr. Beach added that instead of showing signs of shock and grief, he instead told him that he had not been in the area the previous night, a response that Mr. Beach said he found very odd. The next person to take the stand was Mr. George Pratt, a dealer in paper collars, and who was now also a member of the police force. He testified in two capacities, first as an expert in the manufacture of paper collars, and second as a police officer. In his expert role, he examined the whole collar found in Mr. Latin's bedroom and told the court that he had been able to match it to the one discovered on the bank of the brook, very close to the place where the body was found. Mr. Pratt also told the court that in his capacity as a police officer, he heard Mr. Latin say while in custody that he had lied about where he had been on the night Miss Lucas had died. He said that this admission was not made directly to a police officer, but to another prisoner named John Sheehan. Officer Pratt stated that the conversation between the two men was clearly audible. A young boy named Alva Wilmot testified that he had seen Mr. Latin near Ellen Lucas's house on the 2nd of October. He told the court that he did not recall the exact time, but said that it was after dark, and that Mr. Latin was walking alone towards the home of Miss Lucas. 25 additional witnesses had been summoned by the prosecution, and as each one gave evidence, despite the weather, the trial continued to draw great public attention. One of these witnesses was Miss Mattie Smith, who told the court that in May 1874, Mr. Latin had confided in her that he was keeping company with another young woman and no longer wanted to be with Miss Ellen Lucas, who he had already promised to marry. Miss Smith said that he made it clear to her that despite his ongoing relationship with Miss Lucas, he wanted to marry the other young woman. According to Miss Smith, Mr. Latin then asked her if she could provide him with some kind of medication that was able to induce a miscarriage. She told the court that she refused his request and made it clear that she would not supply him with anything of the kind. As the trial went into its second week, several medical and forensic witnesses gave testimony. Dr. Abernethy stated that in his opinion, the wounds found on the young woman's forehead were not serious enough on their own to have caused her death. Dr. Hubbard also testified. He told the court that he had examined the organs of the deceased, but said that he found nothing that could clearly explain the cause of death. He said that the mark, or indentation on her forehead, may have resulted from prolonged pressure rather than a direct blow. Professor Wheeler, who had conducted a chemical analysis of Ellen Lucas's stomach, testified that he found no poison present, but he did identify a small amount of gravel, which in his opinion had probably been swallowed while she was being held under the water. The professor also confirmed that he had tested the substance that was found in Mr. Latin's room, and that it was pure strychnine. Before the judges considered the verdict, State Attorney Mr. James Olmsted delivered a methodical and persuasive address, guiding the court through the intricate web of evidence that had led to the charge of murder against James Latin. Mr. Olmsted began by stating the fundamental question: did Ellen Lucas die by violence or by her own hand? The evidence, he argued, pointed unmistakably to murder. He said that although the body had been initially examined without conclusive findings, a second post-mortem had confirmed that all of the young lady's organs were healthy at the time of her death. He then turned next to the matter of drowning. Could Miss Lucas have taken her own life in water just 3 inches deep? He dismissed this notion with a composed, methodical analysis. He said that the gravel found in the stomach of Miss Lucas matched that found in the brook, and plant matter also found within her suggested that she had inhaled it while alive and struggling to breathe. He insisted that she had not just simply fallen, she had been forcibly held face down. Mr. Olmsted then pointed to the physical evidence of restraint, the bruising on the victim's wrists, a bonnet that had been crushed inwards, with impressions from her thumb and fingers, a torn collar, a necktie, and fragments of a shawl on nearby bushes, which all suggested that a struggle had occurred. He reminded the court that the young lady had dressed carefully, left home at exactly 7 o'clock, and gone to meet someone by arrangement, and that someone, he insisted, was Mr. James Latin. The motive, Mr. Olmsted said, was painfully clear. Mr. Latin had kept company with Miss Ellen Lucas and had promised to marry her. She was pregnant with his child, and that night they were to settle details of their wedding. But Mr. Latin had become entangled with another young woman and wished to escape his obligations to Miss Lucas. The attorney also carefully reconstructed Mr. Latin's movements. He said that witnesses had been presented to the court who had seen him with Miss Lucas shortly after she had left her house, and later he was seen alone behaving oddly. The clothes he had worn that night were recovered from his trunk and were still damp, and the analysis from the laboratory had confirmed that the water on them matched the salt content of the tidal brook where Ellen's body had been found. The torn necktie and collar discovered at the scene belonged to Mr. Latin, and a fibre from Ellen's shawl had also been discovered on his hat. Mr. Olmsted conceded that these were delicate threads, but together they formed a strong and unbroken chain. No single piece, he said, stood alone, but in combination they painted a clear picture of what had happened. Mr. James Latin had murdered Miss Ellen Lucas, who he was due to marry and who was carrying his child. Mr. M.W. Seymour, the counsel for the defence, dismissed the prosecution's version of these events and reminded the courts that no poisonous substance was found in the body of Miss Lucas and death had been from drowning. He stated that the notion that one cannot drown in shallow water was flawed, and that there were many documented cases, tragic but real, of precisely such accidental drownings, especially where fainting, intoxication, or pregnancy-related weaknesses had been involved. The bruises and torn garments, while suggestive, were not exclusive proof of assault, and could equally indicate a fall, panic, or attempts of trying to save herself. He claimed that if this had been premeditated murder, would Mr. Latin truly have left behind so much that pointed to him? The fibres, the collar, the wet trousers. These, he said, were not actions of a man covering a crime, but one caught in a tide of circumstantial misfortune. He stressed that motive is not proof, and suspicion is not guilt. Then, looking at the judges, he said that the chain of evidence the state had relied upon may look strong from afar, but under inspection, it contained an abundance of doubts. After listening to the closing statements from both counsels, the two judges retired to consider the case. When they returned, all eyes were on the dock, where James Latin stood, pale and rigid, his hands clenched, his gaze fixed at the bench. The judges then announced that they found James Latin guilty of second-degree murder and that he would be sent to prison for the rest of his natural life. A quiet murmur swept through the courtroom, not of relief, but of surprise. Mr. Latin swayed slightly as the words struck him, though whether from shock or reprieve none could say. There was no doubt in the minds of many that if Mr. Latin had been tried before a jury of his peers, the outcome would have been far more severe. In the opinion of most, the case had been proven, and the penalty, had it rested in their hands, would have been death by hanging. As James Latin was led from the courtroom under heavy guards, an angry crowd threw snowballs and stones at the prison carriage, and people shouted, "Hang him!" Once the prisoner was inside, the guards ordered the carriage to move, and it headed off as jeers echoed behind it. James Latin spent the next 6 years in prison, where he eventually succumbed to consumption. He died in 1881, having never confessed to the crime. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next brief case.